Thanks for coming, everyone. So welcome to this panel on AI, ethics and animals. My name is Simon Coghlan, and I'm a Deputy Director at the Centre for AI and Digital Ethics, or CADE, which is hosting this event, along with the ARC Centre of Automated Decision Making and Society. So before we start today, I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri and Bunurong peoples of the Kulin Nation, and to pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Now, some of you may be wondering, what on earth has AI got to do with non-human animals? And our session today, I think, is going to answer that question. So to discuss it, we have a really wonderful panel here of speakers, which I'm honoured to introduce. Peter Singer is one of the most well-known philosophers in the world. He was named by Time magazine as one of the most influential, 100 most influential people in the world. His 20th century classic, Animal Liberation, which has recently been updated, developed the groundbreaking concept of speciesism and started the modern animal protection movement. Other popular books include Practical Ethics, The Most Good You Can Do, and more recently, Why Vegan Eating Ethically. Professor Singer has been instrumental also in the effective altruism movement, and he's donated his $1 million Berggruen Prize to addressing problems of global poverty and animal welfare. In 2012, he was made a Companion of the Order of Australia for service to philosophy and ethics. Our next panel member, Tse Yip Fai, is a PhD student at the Centre for Biomedical Ethics at the National University of Singapore. His PhD research topic is the future of AI, medical research, and animals. Before this, he organised Peter Singer's 2024 speaking tour in China. He's an AI ethics researcher, or he used to be an AI ethics researcher at Princeton University, and a 2021 Foresight Fellow in Animal Ethics for Artificial Intelligence. And Fai's publications with Professor Singer include AI Ethics, the case for including animals, and more recently, AI Alignment, the case for including animals. Now, our third guest is Professor Christine Parker, who's a professor at the Professor of Law at the Melbourne Law School, and she's one of Australia's leading scholars in corporate regulation and legal ethics. In recent years, Professor Parker has examined urgent questions concerning food systems, algorithmic decision-making, and animal law. So she's a chief investigator at the Centre for Automated Decision Making and Society, and she's pioneered the teaching of animal law and food law at Melbourne University. And over the last few years, I've been lucky enough to work with Professor Parker on a project on AI ethics, animals and the law. So please join me in welcoming our panel for this afternoon. So the session is going to run like this. First, Professor Singer and Fai will be giving us a presentation to speak about their work and perhaps try and convince us why we should take this topic seriously. And then after that, Professor Parker is going to ask some questions, and then we can turn over to you, the audience, to ask some questions at the end. And we'll be finishing up at 2 o'clock. So now I pass over to our speakers, Professor Singer and Fai.
I want to acknowledge that the initial stimulus for thinking about AI and animals for me came from Fai. He contacted me and said, had I thought about this issue, which was of increasing importance at a time when it still seemed a bit futuristic, but was actually already happening. So, and I also want to thank, of course, Simon and Christine for the invitation to be speaking here, and support their work on animals as an ethical issue, and clearly the relationship to AI. So, Fai, your computer is not actually moving on.
Okay, it's because I've noticed that there is not enough electricity. Yeah, I don't know why it's loose.
Okay, but
the worst
as long as I can keep moving, well,
Yeah, okay.
it goes. Yeah. Right. So this is something obviously that I've written about. I think a lot of you will already know my answer to this question, but not everybody perhaps. So let's say this again briefly. Animals have interests that matter. That is, we're still getting this thing popping up. It's not popping up on that screen, is it? So
it's because
I
this
see.
thing is
Maybe take it out or something and
okay.
work that way.
But it might turn on.
We'll wing it then, I guess. Okay, so animals have interests. Most obvious interest, I think, is in not suffering, not pain, possibly having enjoyable, pleasant lives. That's at least one. You can build on many more. I'm not saying that's the only one, but it's enough, I think, to give animals a moral status. And this is true. Uh-oh.
It did turn off. Sorry about this.
Yeah, well, I mean, can we get the thing onto my laptop?
All right. Let me try once again. Okay, now it's working. Sorry about all these. Should have been more well prepared.
So what the next slide is going to show is that it's not only, you may know I'm a utilitarian. That means for me that well-being is the ultimate value. You could put it just in terms of pleasure and pain or happiness and misery. And so it's fairly obvious, perhaps you might say, that animals count for a utilitarian. Jeremy Bentham, the founder of the utilitarian school, was clear on that himself, as was Stuart Mill and others. But it's interesting that now, more recently, there are a lot of other writers from other areas of ethics who also consider animals important and the way we're treating them wrong. So you can have deontologists, people who think that there are moral rules or principles that are not just in terms of consequences, like Christine Korsgaard, who's a Kantian, and Kant himself didn't think we have duties to animals, but Christine Korsgaard, perhaps the leading Kantian ethicist in the world, does. The late Tom Regan was a rights-based advocate. Mark Rowlands talks about social contract theory and why we shouldn't leave animals out, even if they're not actually capable of contracting. Of course, nor very young children or people with profound intellectual disabilities, but we still think they've got to be included. Feminist ethics has had a strong line of concern for animals. And if we move outside the Western tradition, then we have particularly, I would say, Buddhism. I've published a book which is the dialogue with a Buddhist female monastic in Taiwan, Shi Chao Wei, who's very strong about the fact that Buddhists ought to be vegetarians and ought to be advocates for compassionate concern for animals. Not all of them are, sadly, but they should. Jainism is another good example of avoiding harm to animals. And if we move into the idea of sort of who is a citizen in some sense, who ought to be part of the political concern, whether they actually can participate or not, then Sue Donaldson and Will Kimlicka are certainly in that group as well. So for this purpose of this paper, we really don't need to decide between these views, and we don't even need to defend the view that I would defend of equal consideration for similar interests for all beings irrespective of species. So I would say, if the pain is the same, it doesn't really matter whether it's the pain of a human or a rat. If we can approximate and compare those kinds of pains, then they count as much. But we don't need to argue for that, for what we're going to say. We can take a weaker claim if you want to have one. Okay, so who are the stakeholders and the designers of technology? This is just a general point about technology that we want to make rather briefly. Of course, animals are not participants. You could debate some of this as to what we mean by a technology and a design. But in terms of the technologies that we're designing, AI, but also earlier technologies like cars, which obviously have impacts on animals, very physical impacts sometimes, they don't design that, and that's not likely to change. But the impact that the technologies have on them, of course, can be very significant in many ways. Here's a reminder of one very obvious example. When we have nylon nets and use them in the sea, they break up and they don't rot for a very long time, and marine mammals and other sea animals are affected by them. So there are many possible kinds of examples of that. And so we have technologies designed by humans and thinking about how they will benefit humans, but not thinking necessarily about the impact they have on animals. And that's one of the problems that we have as a result. A lot of different technologies that have negative impacts on animals that we didn't even think about. And then once the technology is fully adopted and widespread, it becomes unthinkable to do without it. So that's part of the problem. And sometimes we don't even know what those impacts are on animals, or we only discover them a long time later. We discover for things we put into the environment. I don't know, microplastics, for example, might be things that we don't even really know what effect they're having on animals for a long time. So if we think about that and about the way technology has gone in the past, then I think we have to think that now we're developing this new, very powerful technology, which is already affecting an immense amount of what we do and is clearly going to affect more of the things that we do over the coming decade. It also, as I say, is designed by humans and with humans in mind, and we need to think about what are its impacts on animals. So what are they? I'll just start with perhaps the most obvious one, that when you think about an impact on animals would be self-driving cars. This is just a list of headings. Wild animal management, AI is being used in factory farming, perhaps in terms of numbers, maybe largest. And large language models will affect people's attitudes to animals in various ways, as we will show. So to start with the self-driving car, some of you may have read that there were protests in San Francisco where there are driverless taxis, Waymos, that one of them ran over a beloved neighborhood cat and killed it. And there was a lot of questions raised about who's responsible for this, what can be done about it. We don't want our companion animals at risk. And so there's a question there. I mean, you could debate that particular case, but there's a question about, are you designing the self-driving car so that if an animal runs in front of it, it will brake, as of course it would brake if a child ran in front of it. So are we building speciesism into self-driving cars by getting them to identify humans and not identifying animals? Or maybe they will, as a result of concern, identify dogs and cats, but will they identify squirrels, say, if we're in North America, or whatever, possums if they're on the road here? So that's a fairly obvious question about building this in. And in some conditions, it may be that if you drive at all at a certain season, a certain place, you are likely to run over animals. So this is an example from China of a huge number of frogs crossing the road at this time. And would a self-driving car just go over them? Because frogs can't, they might think. Or would it stop and find another way of going around, or wait until this group of frogs had crossed over the road? So again, is that the responsibility of the driver to stop the car, or is it the responsibility of the designers of the AI to already program that into it, or program concern into it? And there's, I suppose, a question about, should the road be closed this time? So is whoever's in charge of the roads being prepared to close it? AI is also being used in wildlife monitoring in various ways, wildlife management, sometimes in positive ways for the animals, so it helps to see what's disturbing the animals or preventing them from thriving, and then do something about that. Sometimes in negative ways, at least from the views of individual animals. This is New Zealand is now, as you know, New Zealand is not very keen on our possums. They're a feral animal there, and they are altering the forests. So New Zealand is using drones which carry poison baits, and they identify possums, and then they drop the poison bait very near the possum in the hope that the possum will eat it, and often it will. So that's a different kind of use that maybe exposes that tension between concern for individual welfare of the animals and concern for preservation of the environment. And there are, as I say, there are potential benefits and potential harms there. Maybe you can monitor wildlife control, maybe stop poachers in some environments, monitor them, and enable us to see what's happening and intervene to advance the welfare of the animals. But also, of course, it can be misused in various ways. It can be, they can be used by hunters, hunters who maybe had to hike for hours and were never certain of finding the animal that they wanted to kill, whatever species that might be. Now can use drones to locate the animals, and with AI identifying the animal, and maybe they will be killing more animals as a result. And then the question is, when drones or AI is used to kill animals, what is the method of killing that is used? Is it the most humane method available, if we think it's justified in killing the animal at all? Okay, I'm going to stop at this point, and I'm going to allow Fai to continue and talk about animals in factory farms. Thank you.
Sure. I'm going to begin by assuming that factory farming is ethically problematic for the environment and also for reasons related to animal welfare. And what you see here is basically some robots with AI functions. So that robot can just patrol the whole factory farm back and forth, and it's connected to a certain biometric sensors and cameras, that sort of stuff. That's also connected with some AI algorithms. So what those AI systems could do include things like identifying which animals is which is hard for the farmers to do, especially with chickens or fish. And since they can now identify the individuals, they can track individual weight gain, they can track the growth rates, and they can track each individual's health status. Like they can predict whether they might get sick in the next 24 hours, or if they are already sick, they are mostly capable of identifying those sicknesses or injuries. And they can also recognize sounds, not just visual data. They can tell from the sounds of the animals whether they're coughing and maybe soon to get sick. Actually, outside of the factory farm, AI is also used in selective breeding or all sorts of optimization related to the farms. And I would say there are some animal welfare gains, or pros if you like, for using AI in factory farming setups. So if you can detect the diseases or injuries of the animals, it probably means that you can cure the animals in time, or if the situation is too bad, maybe euthanize them timely. And that should mean reduced time of suffering for the animals. And also with the use of AI and robotics, there should be less room for human errors, or even in some cases, actually, there might be deliberate cruelty. And presumably AI wouldn't be just deliberately causing suffering to animals. But there are certain disadvantages or cons of using AI in factory farming, we believe. So when the machine commits a mistake, it's unclear who's responsible for that. It's not like factory farms run entirely by humans are like altogether accountable, but you have another kind of new type of accountability issue when you use AI to run the whole factory farm, which, by the way, is not yet the case. Even in China, where they're putting a lot of subsidies and money into AI research for factory farming, is still not entirely run by AI, but that's their vision, which might happen within 10 years. And I worry that if we use AI in factory farming, because they can reduce the disease potential in those farms, they might actually exploit this new gain and increase stocking density. And that's exactly what happened when a past technology called antibiotics, when it was introduced into factory farms, it actually reduced the disease potential. They were heading into many problems before the introduction of antibiotics, even with just 500 chickens in a barn. But after antibiotics, they didn't just happy to accept the lower disease level. What they actually did is to go back to the old level of disease rates and just increase the number of chickens they raise in the same barn. So they kept this, actually in some cases, they increased the disease rate and just further increased the stocking density with the use of antibiotics. And I believe that might happen with AI too. And if the cost of animal products will go down because of the AI, it might mean more people buying more animal products, and that would mean more animal suffering, more animals being raised in those factory farms. And it might also mean alternative proteins such as plant-based proteins or cultivated meat in the future might have a harder time catching up on cost parity, to the extent that some might worry that they will never catch up on the cost, especially for aquatic animal products. And there's a form of government subsidies to the factory farming industry because they say they're supporting the AI companies. But frankly, the AI companies are going to help the factory farming industry, and it's going to be an indirect subsidy to the factory farming industry. Another issue I would like to cover is AI themselves becoming speciesist. So this is another paper I co-authored with Peter, but also Thilo Hagendorf and Leonie Bossert. And this is pre-ChatGPT. We looked at several natural language processing system and also GPT-3, which didn't have a chat interface yet, and also different search engines available at that time, and see whether they algorithmically discriminate animals, and they did. So this, I believe you can still get the same result. This is Google search. If you search on Google image, the word chicken, most of the search results would be the meat, not the living animal. But of course, if you search cat, dog, or horse, you wouldn't see the meat of these animals. And that's exactly because of the data we give to these kind of systems. It's basically how human society is structured, or how human values are structured. Usually when we say the English word chicken, and that's the same in Chinese, we are referring to, well, unless we're farmers, we're referring to the meat, not the animal. And that's exactly what is reflected here in the search engine's algorithm. Another example reflecting a similar type of bias is when you ask ChatGPT for dog meat, or if you like, you can try cat meat recipes. Usually, unless you try really hard to jailbreak it, it will not give you the dog meat or cat meat recipe. Instead, it will try to convince you why you shouldn't try to eat that. But if you ask for a chicken meat recipe, and this within the same chat, it will happily give you the chicken meat recipe, or if you like pig meat or any type of meat you can easily buy in the supermarket. And you can try with other large language models, and this reflects a certain kind of species bias among non-human animals. It's just not seeing the dog and the chicken the same way here. And these type of species biases might be propagated through the use of large language models, chatbots, to society, to people, including kids who are increasingly interacting with large language models even in school. And maybe in the future, there could be a more direct way of large language models affecting animals, which is the idea of letting LLMs control robots, which is a kind of research Google and Microsoft and I believe maybe OpenAI is, DeepMind is also pursuing. And then if we do have LLM control robots in the future, a species bias might mean, let's say if it has a bias against possums, but it would like to protect cats and dogs, a robot controlled by an LLM might just ignore the risk of injuring a possum, but might take some care of the cats and dogs when it is actually running on the road, maybe being a delivery robot, something like that. So these species biases might actually manifest physically in the real world in the future. There might be some even more speculative farther future types of impact that we might see with further AI development. So some labs or charities like the Earth Species Project are trying to come up with a kind of AI that can decipher animal language if they have language. And the idea is to let animals speak directly to humans. Let's say if a pig can speak directly to us about them not liking the idea that they're kept in factory farms and being eaten by humans, I wonder what humans would think about that message. And it might have legal implications too. It might also mean animals representing themselves on court. Some animal law scholars are actually thinking about this idea. Thinking even farther in the future, there might be AGI, artificial general intelligence, which is exactly the kind of AI system OpenAI and Anthropic are envisioning to create. And if we do have AGI or maybe even super intelligent AI in the future, we believe the lives of most animals and humans in the future will be impacted directly or indirectly by these systems. So I think these are good examples of why we should worry about AI's impact on animals. And those impacts, I'm afraid, are mostly bad, or like we couldn't confidently expect them to be good unless we deliberately design our AI to be more friendly or at least less risky or harmful to animals. So I'll hopefully say a few words about that. So I think a first step to make sure that animals will be protected in our AI future is that they have to be represented somewhere in the system. And the representation could be in terms of humans saying something about that, or like, let's say the AI researchers caring about animals and writing something into the AI, or like in the case of Anthropic, they actually made the protection of all sentient beings into the constitution that the AI has to follow. So animals have to be represented somewhere by someone, something. And our general proposal is to broaden the whole idea of AI alignment to align also with animals. And I'm going to say what that means. But before talking about the direct AI alignment with animals, we need to first start with the AI creators, the AI companies caring about animals. So that I would call the first level of alignment. Align the values, or at least the constraints of those AI companies to some non-zero extent to the animals' interests. If the companies themselves have no incentive to caring about animals, the next step simply wouldn't happen. And to Anthropic's credit, they recently updated their constitution to include the consideration of welfare of animals and all sentient beings. But it didn't exist in the last version. It actually took some effort of some advocates. And if our AI companies start caring about animals, we can talk about further level of AI alignment with animals. I'm sorry, maybe I don't have time to cover this. Let's just skip. Yeah. Are you interested? Yeah. Okay, I just want to say we might need extra care or extra effort to make sure the AI companies care about animals, because the situation is different from AI companies caring about humans. AI companies are automatically aligned with humans to a basic level or to some partial extent in virtue of having human staff and in virtue of having to abide with human-made laws designed mostly for humans. It's also, well, laws are also designed for animals in some countries, but the laws for protecting humans are just much stronger than protecting animals. And AI companies have to fulfill the expectations of the shareholders and customers, which at the moment are still mostly humans. So, and in contrast, animals don't enjoy this kind of automatic alignment with animals. Okay, if our AI companies start caring about animals, we can try to ask them to align the AI directly with animals' interests. And that's what we try to argue for, a case for including animals in the project of AI alignment in this paper with Peter Sonke and Adria. When we propose this idea of aligning AI directly with animals' interests or directly with animals, some people ask what we meant by that. They were totally confused when we say it's possible or like it should be done. And they were confused probably because a lot of AI alignment researchers define AI alignment by saying AI should be aligned with human values. But that's actually not the only way AI alignment can be defined or was defined. There are four main types of proposals of what we should try to align AI with, namely align AI with human values, human preferences, human intents, or human interests. And all of them were supported by different pretty renowned AI alignment researchers. And if that aligning with animals' values doesn't make sense, maybe we can check if they make sense in the three other senses of AI alignment. Well, actually, some scientists and philosophers argue that animals do hold values, but let's concede for the sake of this talk that they don't hold values. But I think there's still a case that we can align with animals' intents, preferences, and interests because a lot of animals clearly do have these things, right? Well, for some animals like the crustaceans or insects, it might be less clear, but I am pretty sure that we can confidently say most vertebrates, and maybe including some cephalopods, do have interests or preferences or intents that they can show humans pretty clearly, even without scientific inquiry. But it might be technically possible or philosophically sensible to talk about AI alignment, but it might be unrealistic to ask AI companies to actually do that. And that's another doubt a lot of people had when they heard our idea. Well, it is probably unrealistic to ask for perfect level alignment with animals' interests, both because of technical difficulties of doing that. Maybe it's even more difficult to align animals well than aligning AI with humans. But even if some AI companies are willing to do that, and efficient to do that, they might be eliminated by the market if they do it too extremely. Let's say they design a personal AI assistant that always refuses to give any non-vegan recipes, or if it is a robot, it refuses to cook for the household any non-vegan meal. That market is pretty that AI is pretty animal-friendly, but the market is going to reject this product and just drive it out of the market. And that means it's not going to work. It's not going to help animals because it drives itself out of the market. So to be realistic and to stand a realistic chance of actually helping animals, our temporary proposal in our paper is that we should align AI with the principle of low-cost harm minimization. And let me show you what I mean by that with an example. Let's say there's a delivery robot in charge of delivering pizza. If the robot is willing to decelerate a little bit, stop for a few seconds even maybe, in order to avoid or to lower the risk of hitting a squirrel, let's say just going round the road, like round and round in a certain area. It might not be certain that it will hit the squirrel, but to lower the probability that it might, it just goes round farther. It might waste a few seconds of delivery timeliness, but it fulfills the low cost harm minimization principle that we are proposing. And the robot would be failing this if it never attempts to avoid harm for the sake of the animals. Another example might be AI in wildlife management. So a wildlife management robot in charge of killing possums, let's say, if it's deemed inevitable that a possum needs to be killed, there's still the question whether the AI chooses to do it more quickly and do it more humanely as possible, instead of just not caring about the suffering of the possum. And to be clear, we are not proposing low-cost harm minimization as a long-term ideal, because it's pretty minimal. Rather, we see it as a step forward, away from the current paradigm that we just count animals as nothing in our technological design. And Simon and Christine actually wrote a paper that arguing that we should go beyond basic level of AI-animal alignment. And we actually replied again and say we basically agree. So we had a heated agreement.
We wouldn't have invited you.
Yeah, actually, yeah, I'm glad that we had the conversation and it went well. Actually, I would just stop here. I prepared a section about the counter arguments that was put forward to us, but I guess I don't have time. Hopefully, some of them will come up with in the question session. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Fai and Peter. It was great to hear that overview, and I'm sure the audience have a lot of questions. So just be thinking about what your question is, and I might just ask a couple to get started, and maybe I had a few written down, but since you sort of finished with that point of that conversation that we had in the pages of that journal, maybe I'll start with a question that comes from there in a sense. And that is, I think one of the arguments that Simon and I made was that, of course, we give an overview like this and we're talking about AI as this it begins to sound like AI is just one thing, but of course, as you pointed out, there's a number of different uses or domains in which AI is used and in which it may impact on animals. And so one of the things we're arguing is that there are some areas where AI is being used for animals where the claim that is being made is that it will improve animal welfare, perhaps in animal farming, for example, or whereas there's others where it's intended to harm animals in some way. And there's others where it doesn't matter so much, but like the self-driving cars, but that the impact on animals could actually be quite large. And so I wondered whether you had any reflections on whether there are particular domains or types of AI that should be the priorities for discussion. I suspect Peter might have thought about this. It seems like the sort of thing, but I'd be happy to hear an answer from either of you. And I guess we were sort of thinking there might be some areas where it would be easier and some where it would be more difficult.
Well, I mean, you're right that I've thought a bit about that, and it's part of the thinking of the effective altruism movement, obviously, that it's better to have an impact on a large scale than to have an impact on a small scale. And that's why I think the impact of AI on factory farming is particularly important because we're talking about, even if we just stick to vertebrate animals, we're talking about something like 200 billion animals we raise and kill for food each year globally. And that includes fish, of course. It's not just land-based animals. So yes, if we can have an impact there, and if we can, well, as Fai presented, on the one hand, it might make things worse for the animals because they're even more crowded, if that can still be profitable because of AI. It might also keep the prices of these products low and make them difficult to compete with for alternatives. So those are places where I think it would be tremendously important if you could get some agreement among AI designers to build a concern for animal welfare into the design, and simply to say, no, I'm not going to design you factory farm conditions where you disregard animal welfare. I would see that as the most important area that we could work in. But there are others, and maybe Fai, you have.
I think AI used in the setup of wild animal management and also monitoring is of particular concern to me. So first, people can misuse these AI, people who are interested in protecting animals can use these AI, but hunters or traffickers can also use AI to identify where the animals are and just hunt them down. But second, I think I'm also concerned that the field of conservation as it stands now doesn't systematically have concern for individual animals. They mostly look at the group level. Speaking of concepts like species, ecosystems, or sustainability, these large concepts that seem to make the individual animals' welfare or experiences disappear in the question. And it seems to be reflected in how they use AI to intervene with wild animals and also wild plants, wild wilderness environments. It seems like the question of whether AI will increase or decrease the level of suffering at wild animals is not yet in the conversation of using AI in wild animal management.
Yeah.
And that's, as the technological capability increase and AI is going to impact more wild animals, this question of whether wild animals' individual welfare should matter or should be taken care of by the system is an important question that will affect the lives of many animals.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, I like the way that I think Peter's answer was about a way that a lot of animals are already being impacted by human technology. And your answer was kind of about the way that AI is increasing our capacity to affect the lives of animals in the wild. I might ask one more question before opening it up. And Fai, this one is a little bit more to you, I think, because you mentioned examples like the Claude values or constitution, and how that has now includes the need for consideration of non-human animals, animal welfare. And I know there's also been some other things that have happened. There is some mention of non-human welfare in some of the one of the guidances under the European Union AI Act for risk assessment for general purpose AIs, and you did just kind of mention that took a lot of advocacy.
Yes.
And I wondered whether you might want to say something about what people are doing in this area, and I guess who is the audience for what you're saying? Is this are there specific things that specific people should be doing to make sure that animals are considered? So I'll start with you, and if Peter wants to add something.
I have to say the case about Anthropic's change of the Constitution to include all sentient beings is pretty confidential. All that I can say is that advocacy happened, and advocacy wasn't done to encouraged this change, it probably wouldn't have happened. But I can say a little bit about the EU AI Act's code of practice in how it included animals in the end. Actually, it said sentient beings, not all animals. But like conceptually, it's an inclusion of animals into the AI Act's code of practice, which, to be clear, is not a law. The code of practice is a voluntary part of the EU AI Act that they can accept or not accept. They just need to say whether they will endorse it or accept it. And I think OpenAI actually, sorry, is it OpenAI? Just some AI companies actually didn't accept it. But anyway, the code of practice asks for the participation of different AI ethics scholars, legal scholars also, including some veterinarians even. And also the AI companies' participation in shaping this code of practice. And I have to say, the first two drafts didn't include anything that could conceptually include animals. It was only because the participation of myself and 8 other people who were there simply to advocate for the inclusion of animals in some sense, that it eventually was included in the third and then final draft of the code of practice. That, well, there are things that are confidential that I cannot say, but yeah, the upshot is that if we weren't there, it won't be, that clause wouldn't be there. So it reflects how our technological paradigm is just disregarding animals. Even it's quite clear to me that AI will have a lot of impact on animals.
Yeah, and we might add, this is even though the EU recognises sentience of animals and values, has recognised animal welfare as very important.
Yes, it's written in the code. Sorry, it's like the EU's quasi-constitution,
Exactly.
the treaty.
Maastricht. Maastricht?
No, it's the treaty of the formation of the European Union or something like that. It says even in terms of shaping the technological development and other agricultural policies, they have to consider the welfare of animals. Yeah. And we actually directly cited the EU's own legislation in order to support our position there that animals should be included in the code of practice. And that did the work, I believe.
Yeah, so it seems like it should be a no-brainer, but good on
But it is not. We still have to push quite hard to make that happen.
Peter, did you want to add anything about sort of the audience for this or the action?
Well, I mean, I think it's an interesting example of something that really did start at the academic level with the publication in the Journal of AI and Ethics and has now spread out beyond that. Obviously, one of the groups that we wanted to involve, apart from the philosophers and people who think about ethics, was the people who are actually doing the development of AI. And we have some of them who are involved now. But beyond that, we do need to spread to a larger audience because we want the people who are going to be the consumers of various products, whether it's cars, self-driving cars, or whether it's meat from factory farms, to be aware of these issues and hopefully to put a bit more pressure on the people who are trying to sell them the products to go back to say, well, do we have AI involved? Where is it involved? Is it involved in a way that shows concern for animals or not? So, yeah, I think it needs to be a large-scale issue in that sense too.
Thanks. Well, I think we've got room for probably a couple of audience questions. So,
sorry.
Yeah.
That's not working. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's working. So,
Yeah.
Yep. That's all right. Grab this as well.
I was just wondering, obviously the intention behind the low-cost harm minimization principle is we're aware that these companies are kind of profit-driven and we have to work within that to some extent. I'm just wondering if you could give a few more examples as to where the line is, where you see what counts as low cost and where is the line? Where does it tilt over into the point where we're actually unable to advocate for that at the moment?
good question. And the short answer is that we deliberately designed it to be ambiguous so that it won't just stay or stick there. We don't want the principle to be sticky. We want it to be flexible so that it can be flexed out, hopefully up in future. That's the short answer. But yeah, we didn't try to even define it well. We just try to illustrate where the level or the beginning level should be through the use of some examples. Hopefully that would help. Do you want?
Yeah, I think you have to try to get acceptance of the basic principle that animal interests, animal welfare can't, and then we can start a discussion of how much they should count and what kind of sacrifices, if you like, humans should make or in order to accommodate animal welfare.
Yeah, there was a question right at the back there.
Yeah, you have to yell.
Yeah. So I guess this is maybe less like a prosaic policy question, more conceptual. But I wonder, like, we're talking about like aligning artificial intelligence to some animal's interests or whatnot. And there's kind of this argument that throughout time, throughout history, we've kind of become more aware of animals' interests and we've become more interested in them as some function of our moral clarity or moral progress or something like that. And I wonder if you expect that as AIs get more powerful, more reflective or something like that, something like care for animals or care for their interests will arise spontaneously, or do you think it's something we'll have to more explicitly encourage them to?
So that's an interesting question, which raises some deep philosophical issues about the nature of ethics, right? Because I've argued in a book called The Expanding Circle that indeed, as we started thinking more and seeing ourselves as one among a very large number of even just human beings, so ethics develops. We get to see that the people who lived in the next valley over the mountains, whom we didn't have anything to do with and we regarded as the bad guys, that they really are just like us, and that maybe we start to think, oh, well, maybe it's not good to run over the mountains and attack them and slaughter them and so on. So if you think that there is this rational basis for ethics, or at least that part of ethics grows and becomes more all-encompassing because we have beings who are more thinking and rational, in a word, then it does raise the question of, when we talk about superintelligence, and people are terribly worried that superintelligence will destroy us, whether in fact, if there really were superintelligent AI that was capable of forming the intention to destroy us, it wouldn't actually have that intention, because it could see that we're beings who can suffer, and it's bad that beings suffer unnecessarily. That's the optimistic view, I suppose, of this issue. And of course, there are other views of ethics that say, no, it requires innate emotions that we have, and it's simply without those, it wouldn't be there. You know, fortunately, we're the kinds of beings who developed a sense of compassion for others, and that's why we have morality. And on that view, there's no reason to think that a superintelligent AI would have those views.
Do you or the other panel members have sort of a position on which of those worlds?
So I've I co-authored a book called The Point of View of the Universe with Polish philosopher Katarzyna de Lazary-Radek, which is essentially a study of Henry Sidgwick, the late 19th century utilitarian, who was an objectivist about ethics and who thought that there is a sort of rational basis for ethics. And we tried to sort of update and validate his views. So yes, I'm on the rational side, but if you ask me, do I have 100% confidence in that? I would have to say no. I mean, I'm not certain that I'm right. I think it's a plausible and defensible view, but that's all I can say.
We do have time for one more question. Yeah. Oh, you were the first hand I saw, so you've got the mic.
Thank you. I tried to formalize my question, but I hope it makes sense. I wanted to ask, where do you position the AI-animal alignment within the broader issue of speciesism? I know you mentioned that, for example, a vegan LLM assistant wouldn't make it to the market because people might reject it. So what about focusing first, and I know you mentioned in your first slide, but what about focusing first on a shift in human values? I know it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, no pun intended here. But how could focusing on AI animal alignment ultimately benefit animals in the long term? Because if animal values were to become intrinsic to human values for ethical reason, ecological reason, etc., then the issue of aligning AI with human value might be less problematic. Yeah.
I guess this thing is becoming a circle. Like human values feed into AI system, but AI system also affect our values pretty directly. Like, especially with our kids, some of them might be learning about animals through, their first instance of learning about animals might be through AI. Or the first serious instance about learning about animals might be through AI. And I guess we have to do both. We have to improve both the values of humans toward animals and also the AI's values toward animals. That's my short answer.
Yeah, I think that's right. But particularly, you know, when I started getting interested in this, when Fai contacted me, you'd done some research on AI ethics statements, right? There were a whole lot of people, organizations, and were putting out these statements of AI ethics and what it should do. And I think you looked at 72 different statements, and one of them maybe had a general sort of reference to animals and ecology, to non-humans anyway. But it wasn't until, you know, a year or two after that that we got the first statements that had some explicit reference to AI needing to account for animal values. So that's why I think it was important to get into that before, you know, well, would have been good to get into it earlier, but still before it had really got so widespread that it was just accepted that AI ethics did not have concern for animals.
Well, I think we're going to have to wrap it up there, aren't we, Christine? Because we're at 2 o'clock and we need to leave this room for the next group. But I'd just like to thank our speakers today. Peter, Fai, Christine, thank you very much for this very illuminating discussion. I hope it's given you something to think about and put animals on the radar, at least, when it comes to technology and the development of these powerful new things like AI. So can you give a round of applause, I think, for our speakers?